welcome to WonderCon at Home. My name is Judy Prince-Neeb. I'm a children's services librarian with the South Pasadena Public Library, and I'm excited to be the moderator for this amazing panel. Our topic today is Change Your World, or at least the contents of your to-be-read pile, with this group of authors whose protagonists drive change in the world through sacrifice and determination. We've got a lot to discuss, so let's dive in with our fantastic panelists. First up, charliejaneanders. Her latest novel is Victories Greater Than Death. She's also the author of The City in the Middle of the Night, which won the Lucas Award, and All the Birds in the Sky, which won the Nebula, Crawford, and Locus Awards, and Choir Boy, which won the Lambda Literary Award. Her short fiction has appeared in Tor.com, Boston Review, Ten House, Conjunctions, the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, Wired Magazine, Slate, Asimov's Science Fiction, Lightspeed, ZYZZYVA, Katamari Literary Review, McSweeney's Internet Tendencies, and tons of anthologies. Charlie Jane also organizes the monthly Writers with Drinks reader series and co-hosts the amazing podcast, Our Opinions Are Correct, with Annalee Newitz. C.L. Clark graduated from Indiana University's Creative Writing MFA program and was a Lambda Literary Fellow. She's been a personal trainer, an English teacher, and an editor, and is some combination thereof as she travels the world. When she's not writing or working, she's learning languages, doing P90 something, or reading about war and post-colonial history. Her short fiction has appeared in Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Faya, and Uncanny, and on Podcastle, which is a fabulous podcast, by the way, where she is currently a co-editor. Her debut novel, The Unbroken, comes out in March 2021. You can follow her on Twitter at C_L_Clark. Namina Forna is a young adult novelist based in Los Angeles and the author of the New York Times bestselling epic fantasy YA, The Gilded Ones. Originally from Sierra Leone, West Africa, she moved to the US when she was 9 and has been traveling back and forth ever since. Namina loves telling stories with fierce female leads and works as a screenwriter in Los Angeles. Thank you. Jordan Ifueko is the New York Times bestselling author of the Raybearer series and other stories. She's been featured on NPR's Best Books, NPR Pop Culture Hour, ALA Top 10, BuzzFeed, and other publications. She writes about magic Black girls who aren't magical all the time because honestly, they deserve a vacation. Ifueko lives in Los Angeles with her husband, David, and their three-legged Trustafarian dog. We're going to talk about that one later. Reginald Overcomem. Rena Barron grew up in a small town, Alabama, where stories of magic and adventure sparked her imagination. After penning her first awful poem in middle school, she graduated to writing short stories and novels by high school. Rena loves all things science fiction and fantasy, ghosts, and superheroes. When she's not writing, she can be found reading or brushing up on her French. Rena is the author of the young adult fantasy novel series, Kingdom of Souls, the first in a trilogy, and a 2019 Junior Library Guild selection. Recently, film rights sold to Warner Brothers with Michael B. Jordan of Black Panther producing, and Missina Saiga of Bell writing the screenplay. Maya and the Rising Dark is the first book in Rena's middle grade contemporary fantasy trilogy set in Chicago. Visit her online at www.renabarron or follow her at Rena the Dreamer on Twitter or Instagram. Thank you all so much for being here. I cannot wait to dive into these talking about all of your different books. And what I'd really love really quick is if you all could come around and just talk briefly about your specific book that you wanted to talk about today that we're highlighting. So I've got Charlie Jane in my corner on the right. So we'll start with Charlie.
Hi, yeah, my novel that comes out in April is called Victories Greater Than Death. That's the cover. And it's the story of a teenage girl named Tina who has known for a few years now that she's not a human being like she appears to be. She's actually the clone of an alien hero. And when she's old enough, she will remember who she really is, and she'll go into space and she'll go and like save the galaxy and be a hero. And she cannot wait to seize her destiny with both hands. But, you know, she kind of, when she actually does get up into space, she kind of discovers it's not as easygoing as she thought it was going to be. And like being a hero is actually not as much fun all the time as she thought it was going to be. And it's all about like kind of Tina realizing that she's not really a chosen one, that what's important is her chosen family of other Earth kids who go into space with her. And it's, it's full of queer characters and romance and friendship and, consent and, it's full of like fun aliens. It's basically by tribute to Guardians of the Galaxy and Star Wars and She-Ra and Steven Universe and a million other things.
Thank you so much. Shira, you are the next person in my little Zoom window. So why don't you go ahead and discuss the Unbroken? Oh, it looks like you're on mute.
Yeah. Just a small side note, it's actually Sheree.
Sheree,
So.
I'm sorry. I've practiced so many different times. I'm so sorry.
No,
I'm
it's
not
okay.
trying
It's
to be
okay.
an asshole.
It's okay. It's totally cool.
Okay, cool.
So the Unbroken follows Terrain, a conscripted colonial soldier who is loyal to the Balladeran Empire, and Luca, who is the Empire's princess. And her only goal is to crush the rebellion so that she can get her uncle off of her throne. So then when Luca sends Terrain as an envoy to the rebels to help both of their goals, those once certain loyalties are tested, and both women are trying to figure out what's more important: love, duty, destiny, family, blood family, found family. And at the base level, the world it takes place in is very much like ours, though there is a sort of religious-based magic system. And one of the key questions I wanted to ask with the Unbroken was, what if we looked at the fantasy trope of magic hunters or artifact hunters as the colonial act that it actually is? So,
thank you. Jordan, let's discuss Raybearer.
Hi there. So Raybearer is actually my release that came out last year, and this year the sequel Redemptor is coming out. We just got to release the cover art, but even I don't have arcs yet, so I can't show them, but you can go look at the cover art on BuzzFeed and my website and everywhere. The premise of the Raybearer series Empire is that there is a Pangea continent of all of these different cultures, about 13, that have been magically hewn into one big continent. And it's ruled by an emperor and a dynasty that is almost immortal because they have a way of developing immunity to every single death except old age. And until my protagonist came along, all of the previous rulers had been male, and all of their best friends were this very magically bonded council of 11 people that were chosen as children. So the protagonist is actually sent to be part of the council of the next emperor. And it's a little hard at this point to describe Redemptor without giving away kind of like every central spoiler of Raybearer. But I will say that it's a story that celebrates the multicultural lens that I think a lot of us third culture kids grew up in. I am the daughter of Nigerian immigrants, and Nigeria itself was a British colony until shortly before my parents moved from there. I also love all of the media I had access to growing up right at the brink of kind of like global streaming and stuff. You know, I grew up with the boom in people watching media from Japan and Korea. I've loved all kinds of literary traditions from South and East Asia, and also like really old stuff from like, you know, like the 1200 France, that kind of poetry and things like that. So all of those inform my storytelling and my fairy tales. And it's also really important to me to show people as heroes and as protected and worthy of love and vulnerability that aren't usually given those opportunities, especially within fantasy. So that's Raybearer and Redemptor.
Thank you so much. Brittany, you're next.
Awesome. Hi. So my most recent release came out a couple of weeks ago. It's called Muse, and the pitch, and I wish I would have written this, but I didn't. The pitch is that it's set in an alternate history America World's Fair in 1893, that this is in America where the country is a monarchy. Science is king, magic might exist, and one girl's touch has the power to grant men's wishes. So it follows our protagonist as she grows up with an inventor father who is losing his mind and has decided that her touch confers blessings on him, that all of his success is due to her presence, that she's his muse. From there, we follow her as she winds up in this conflict between a number of different American provinces where we have women's rights being debated. I was really interested in the American suffragette movement and then thinking about what that might look like in a country that was a monarchy. You know, it's really interested in basically the patriarchy as metaphor. It also has disability rep, which is really important and dear to my heart. Yeah, I had a great time writing.
Thank you so much. Rena, you're next.
So my book is Reaper of Souls. It is a sequel to Kingdom of Souls. So I can't say much about the actual book without giving away all the spoilers. So I'll just talk a little bit about the whole series, Kingdom of Souls. It's basically a story about a girl who's born to a powerful family of witch doctors, and she doesn't have any magic. And to get the magic she kind of needs to stop this terrible evil from rising, she has to trade years off of her life in exchange for magic. The catch is she doesn't know every time she makes a trade how many years she's losing for her life. So it's always a risk of like being the end of things. And so what was really important for me in this story was to tell a story about a person who it's not just centered on her, it's centered on her love for her family, her friends, and her community, and wanting the best for everyone. And just this ideal that magic is something special and that everyone doesn't have it. And what would you risk for the thing that you want if it's to save the people that you love the most?
Thank you. And Namina.
Hi guys, my book is called The Gilded Ones. It's a young adult fantasy set in a severely patriarchal West African influenced world where there's a group of girls who are considered demons because they're faster and stronger than regular people and they bleed gold. One day actual demons come into this world and the humans are like, wait a minute, we sort of need these girls to fight these demons, and so they give them a choice, fight or die. My main character decides to fight and thus goes on an adventure that sort of changes the course of her life and the world. The way that I always tell people to imagine this, it's basically if the Dora Milaje from Black Panther were stuck in the world of The Handmaid's Tale and decided to just burn everything down. So that's The Gilded Ones.
Thank you so much. All right, so the overall theme of this panel is change through sacrifice and determination. And one thing I've noticed when I was reading throughout all of your books is that there was a specific topic of personal identity. And I'd like to use the quote from Raybearer, which comes from the dedication. And for the girls whose stories we compressed into pities and wonders, triumphs and cautions, without asking even once for their names. I'd like to discuss how important personal identity is often sacrificed within your stories and how it is recreated, reborn. So if anyone wants to go first, or if you want me to pick.
I can go first.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Jordan.
I think one of the biggest tools that oppression uses in order to remain is to convince those who are having their identity stolen that this is their true identity. And if it isn't their identity yet, it's the identity they should want. I don't think any kind of ism could have any power unless the people who are being oppressed were were manipulated into conforming to it. I think, so you see Tarisai, my protagonist, at one point, her whole identity is supposed to be to serve this future emperor, to help him rule, to bear his children if he wants to choose her for that. And she sees this future emperor, who, by the way, is a good person, this crown prince, make a terrible mistake in a ruling. You know, he's training to be emperor, and so they allow him to like solve problems to practice. And she sees immediately what the problem is and the mistake he's made, but she is alarmed at this impulse she has to correct him. And so she corrects herself and suppresses her own intellect. And when she manages to submit and be there and just smile at him supportively, she thinks she's done the right thing. She's like, you know, I suppressed the demon in myself, but one that would dare, you know, even think of usurping. So I think that's where personal identity gets complicated, is that, you know, if you tell someone who has been trapped in this kind of environment that, no, this isn't really you, you know, it can really get to a point where they're like, what are you talking about? Like, why are you unhappy with who I am? This is who I am. And I'm very proud to be this. And I aspire to be this, you know, this kind of thing. And I grew up in a very conservative fundamentalist background. You know, it's Nigeria is very steeply split between conservative Christians and Muslims. And, you know, there are varying levels to which the indigenous religions will still influence the culture and the practices. Some just do a hybrid, others are like really extreme, like, no, that's all satanic, that's all demonic. And so I grew up in an environment in which that was very much, you know, I was always trying to self-correct my mind. I would see inconsistencies, I would see hypocrisy, I would see things that didn't make sense, all of these things that applied to women but didn't apply to men, even though technically it was supposed to be a sin for both, you know, and it was just constant self-editing. It's just like, oh, but there must be a reason for that. I just haven't thought of it yet, because I know it's right. I just need to make, you know, the steps to get there. And so that was a very personal journey for me, especially. Interestingly, my book, in terms of racial dynamics, I very much did not want it to be a Black pain or a Black struggle book. This is an empire in which the predominant, and you could say in a way colonizing, culture is actually based on the Yoruba of Nigeria. And while it's definitely not colonization in the sense that Europeans came, you know, and tried to like, you know, with white supremacy, it isn't Black supremacy as much as they're at the top of this bureaucracy. And the reason why I wrote it that way specifically is because I read so many books as a small Black girl where if someone who looked like me was on the cover, it would be about their oppression. And that's an important narrative because it's true, but the danger of that single story means that, you know, a lot of Black kids will grow up thinking like the only story I have of worth in the world is one of, you know, being abused and overcoming it. You know, I wanted a story where a Black girl could be revered from the very beginning. Everyone thinks she's second almost to a goddess. She's like, you know, in the upper tiers of government. Dark skin is associated with the oldest and most powerful regimes. And so all of her conflict comes from the identity she chooses for herself. And using the privilege she has within the system to change it. So that's my bit on personal identity.
I love it. Yeah. And Namina, you were about to say something as well.
I completely agree with Jordan in what she said about personal identity and oppression. And I think that in the Gilded Ones, the oppression comes from it being a crushing patriarchy. And because of that, my main character, Deka, she is someone who, she has a more of a slow journey of self-discovery because she grows up in this place where it's the idea of what a woman is and what a woman should do is so very tight and limited that like really she even her questioning it is almost nearly impossible. Like Deka does not question, and that is how crushing and that is how sort of complete the patriarchy is in the world of Otera and in the world of the Gilded Ones. And so Deka has to go on this journey where she sort of slowly starts to question things because in her world, girls like her, really anybody, any woman who goes outside of the norm of what is considered acceptable, meaning at you go through your ritual of purity and then at age 16 you get married off, and then you serve your husband and your family and everybody that needs you for the rest of your life, and that is what it means to be a virtuous woman. So really anybody who does not fall into this category is considered demonic, but especially with Deka and the Alaki, which is the girls that are like her, that are faster and stronger, they are told that they are demons. And that is something that I play with in the book because there's this idea, particularly when you come from an African culture, as I do, because I was born and raised in Sierra Leone. Our native cultures, our native traditions are always considered demonic. Anything that is outside of Judeo-Christian, sort of like anything that is not white is demonic. And that's what I really wanted to look at, was this idea of who are we really outside of what people tell us that we are, because that for me is the huge danger in the world. And it's the huge danger in the book of if you believe so deeply what other people tell you you are, you know, and especially if you're not a heterosexual like white person, then like basically everything that is everything that is good about you gets squeezed further and further and further and sort of crushed down. And so in the book we look at it through the lens of Deka, but we also sort of look at it through the lens of all the other people. Like if you're a guy who doesn't fall into this, what happens to you? If you're a queer person, a trans person, what happens to you in this world where identity is so tightly constructed? And that's really, for me, what I wanted to examine in this book, because I think so often when we as marginalized people exist in a society or in a culture that is not ours, we are told before we even open our mouths, before we even have a construction of ourselves, who we are. And a huge part of our work, and this is sort of the distraction of oppression, is trying to figure out who you are absent what all the popular culture is telling you that you are. And that's the thing that I examine in my book, is this slow unraveling. Because that's the other thing, is like, I think a lot of times people think that, oh, you have this one, oh my gosh, this is wrong, I'll change it. And it doesn't work like that. When you come from a culture that is overwhelming, it is a slow and long and drawn out process that could take years. Of course, in the book, it takes like a year, but that's really what I wanted to talk about in the Gilded Ones.
Fantastic.
I have a similar process with Terrain, who is so she's a conscripted soldier. She was taken, her and the other Sands in the novel, when she was a child, and she was actually one of the youngest ones taken. And so while all of the Sands had a different amount of like personal identity, they were like 5 to 10 years old. So those older kids had more resistance. Some of them managed to hold on to little nuggets of resistance all the way through. I mean, they're now all adults, and they feel some different kind of way about it, making little pockets of how different people feel about having their identity erased by some sort of instructional ruler. And one of the things I was actually really interested in was how those governing bodies that we look up to, like our teachers or our drill instructors in this case, how they are instrumental in erasing who we might be by giving us sets of rules and rewarding us for following them. in this case, like the older kids who remembered religion, they had it beaten out of them. Language, all of them no longer speak their native language wherever they came from. And so Terrain, who was really, really young compared to the rest of them, she was really, really good at getting rid of the bad stuff that she came in with. So who she was at first. And so she became a really good soldier. And that, you know, that causes problems with people who didn't want to relinquish that identity. And so one of the things I deal with in the Unbroken is just like Namina was saying, how long it takes for you to build something that is your own and not what you were forcibly given to you. And you may not ever do it. You may not be able to do it successfully, whatever that looks like. Especially because to survive, you might develop so many like maladaptive coping strategies just to survive, right? And so I think when people are reading The Unbroken, they will have some questions about some of Terrain's motivations, some of her choices. And I think one of the things I would like people to really consider is how you make choices when you are still trying to figure out what is the right rule set that you should be following, or what is the right identity you want to adhere to. And yeah, so Terrain spends most of the book and will spend the next 2 books trying to figure that out. I don't know if she will be successful, but I think her biggest hurdle is going to be fighting that sense of pride she had in being the best soldier, the best colonizing soldier, and realizing that that may not actually be in line with her internal compass, so to speak.
Yeah. Can I go next? Yeah, I mean, I feel like writing young adult fiction has been really fun, partly because a lot of young adult fiction is about like finding your identity and all the stuff that everybody just mentioned about like internalizing other people's expectations, internalizing the things that culture puts on you, internalizing like the oppression that's handed down to you is something that I love about reading and writing YA, is that you have these systems that were there before you were born and you have to kind of adapt to them. You know, I feel like all of my writing is about finding your own identity on some level because, you know, as a trans person, I really had to kind of work to build my identity like up from the ground in some ways. I had to kind of figure out who I actually am, not the person that I was kind of told to be as a kid. And, you know, that's a whole process. It's a whole struggle of like kind of figuring out who you really are like inside and bringing that out into the world. And, you know, I also as a kid had this sort of confusing thing where I had a really severe learning disability. Like I like almost flunked out of elementary school, and you know, it was only thanks to this one special education teacher who helped me get through that. But I also, especially in middle school, was assigned as like dual exceptional, which meant that I was both gifted and learning disabled. So I was like being told half the time that I was like a smart kid and half the time that I was a kid who couldn't even manage schoolwork. And so it's just like people put messages on you all the time about who you are and who you're supposed to be. And you have to kind of just make sense of it in your own head and figure out what is really you and what is just the image of you that's been put on you by other people. And, you know, I always try to find different ways to talk about that. And Victories Greater Than Death, it really is about this person who's been told for a few years, you're going to go out and be a hero. You're going to save the universe. You're going to be like Captain Kirk or Luke Skywalker or whatever. And, you know, she really wants this. She thinks this is the thing she wants most in the world. But, you know, it's not all of who she is. And there's other sides to her. And there's more to her than just being able to fight and kill and like be a soldier. Like, you know, what I think Jordan was just talking about. I think that, you know, that thing where we expect people to just be able to fight and be able to take on this heroic role is something that I really wanted to think about. So I love all of this stuff about identity, and it's something that I love to deal with in my work.
I'd love to jump in. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah, so in Muse, in the America that I've created, we're dealing with really kind of the patriarchy run rampant. And so our main character finds herself in a position that I think it sounds like it's been a theme for everybody on the panel, and I'm really excited to read everybody's books. But one of the situations she finds herself in is that she's been under her father's thumb her whole life. She's been kept away from the world. And really her only way out is to find a way to more or less like auction herself off for marriage to somebody who is hopefully going to be less awful than her father. And she's convinced herself that that's what she wants, and then that's her best option. And her best friend, Beatrix, on the other hand, is working with a feminist organization that is looking to overthrow their what they see as kind of a debauched, useless young governor of their province and replace him with a woman. But the only woman that they can really see a clear path to putting in power is also terrible. And one of the things I was really interested in is the ways in which we find ourselves in all kinds of imperfect systems, and that the only way sometimes to fix them is to infiltrate them and to remake them from the ground up. But at the beginning of Muse, there are no good options. There's no good movement or organization or society to join. Everybody has their own agendas. Everybody is looking out for themselves. And so when Claire, my protagonist, is swept up into this, she at first refuses to participate in any of it. She says, I need to look out for number one. I need to get out of my father's house. I can't do anything about what's happening around me. And over the course of the novel, she realizes that she does in fact she has skin in the game. Everybody has skin in the game. And in order to remake her world into a fairer place, she has to commit to, everybody's well-being, not just hers. I was also really interested in the book in dealing with the idea of what it looks like to think that once you are out of an abusive situation, in this case, an abusive family relationship, she decides that she's in love with the first person who's nice to her. And so we end up with this love story that is two people who are decent human beings, but who end up in a situation where they're the other's only ally. And so it's the kind of love story that I'm really looking forward to deconstructing in the second book, because it does not end in a place that I think should ring true to the reader. For me, one of the most, personal things about the story is that Beatrix, Claire's best friend, who is this inventor who in my world is racing the two Wright sisters to invent the first glider and then the first airplane, is that she wears an eye patch, which I did for most of my life growing up. I'm visually impaired, and it's been, it's interesting to think. I think a theme that we've all been talking about is the idea of what people decide your life is going to be like, or can be like, or should be like when they look at you. And I knew growing up that wanting to do any kind of work with my life that was at all physical, that involved me moving through the world, was impossible. And so, sort of between that and between the ways in which people decided how smart I was or how worthy I was based on how I looked, really shaped, I think, a lot of my life after that. And so getting to write a character who in this book looks at the expectations and says, you know what, screw it. I don't care how many times I crash my glider into the lake. I know the math. I'm an engineer. I can build it even if I can't fly it. That was really special for me. And I really, I enjoyed giving her the story that I felt like she deserved. So that's Muse.
Rena.
I'll jump in. So for Kingdom of Souls in the sequel, Reaper of Souls, my main character is Ara. A little bit like what Jordan said, I grew up reading a lot of Black stories where people were always oppressed, and it was racial oppression. And it created a very single narrative in my mind. And it's just the way I saw myself all the time because that's what was put in front of me in all types of media, not only books, but television, film, everything. And so that was something I did not necessarily want to explore in books, because there are other ways that we can talk about, many, many other ways we can talk about our self-identity. And so in Ara's case, she's kind of stuck between a couple worlds. Her parents are from two different tribes, so there are two cultures there. And then she lives in a completely different place when her parents moved to a big city, you would say, another country, where she's kind of in between. And she's trying to find her place. Who is she more like? Is she like her father's tribe, her mother's tribe, or is she like where she lives now in this big kind of city? And it's very personal to me. I grew up in a small town. I now live in Chicago. And I feel like I went through something very similar. And I will also say, being an African American, I grew up in a deep, deep South where there were a lot of African influences that I didn't understand growing up and didn't know where they came from, and trying to figure out how they fit in my very Christian conservative upbringing, but they were there. And so I've always kind of felt very in between as well. So that's something that is explored in the book, where Ara has these expectations of herself. Where does she fit within this world of her family's got this background? She doesn't really know it, and she's trying to learn it, but where does she fit? And then there was the expectation of, how do I measure up? How do I measure up to something I don't quite understand, or something I don't quite know? Or in her case, not having magic. How do I measure up to something like that? So the identity for her, the self-identity, is trying to figure out, like, who am I? You know, as a part of my family unit, but who am I as a person? Who am I? And when it comes to making decisions about my future, making decisions about those I'm going to care for and those I'm going to help. So a lot of the book is kind of surrounded there, and it's really influenced by kind of my own feeling of feeling in between. Because oftentimes, as a Black person in America, you're not Black enough, you're not woman enough, you're not anything enough. And having to grow up and feel that way because of kind of the influence of the culture here and the whole colonization thing, you just feel like you're in between. And that's something that I wanted to explore in this book without it being about race, right? Without it being about colonization. I think there are many ways to explore people feeling like they are not, they're not sure who they are. And I hope that she figures it out by book 3, but she's on that journey of kind of discovering who she is.
Fabulous. So we've talked about sacrifice. Let's talk about determination. So I like to quote the Gilded Ones for this one, because I think it says it best. They taught us, Alakai, to suffer, but they also taught us to survive, to conquer. Why are stories of determination so important? And I'd like to start with Namina.
Stories of determination. I think it's because it helps us figure out how to move in our own lives. Because with the Gilded Ones, my main character, Deka, is told she's something, and then that sort of sets her down a path to follow what she has been told. And she has to figure out what is the actual truth and how does she get to figure out her own life. And now she has to sort of craft a new path. And I think that's why stories of determination are so important, because it helps you also craft your own path and your own narrative. Like, especially if you're younger and you're reading something like this and you see, oh, if Deka, in this ridiculous world where everything is so stacked against her and the other Alaki, like still has to get up and like figure it out, then so can I. And for me, like, that's actually one of the reasons why I became a writer, is because when I was growing up, I grew up in not the best circumstances. I grew up during a civil war. And when I would read books, I would read all of these fantasy books where basically the main character also grew up in like not the best circumstances, but they would then craft their own path. And I think that's the importance of books. They say it doesn't matter where you are, you can sort of lift yourself out, you can craft your own narrative, you can become the person that you want to become. And that's such an important message. That's the message that I try to sort of imbue in the Gilded Ones of, it may be awful where you are, it may be crushing, mind numbing, what have you, but you have a little bit of agency in your life. I like to think of it this way, like, you can't change the entire universe to fit you, but you can, like, if you can shift it like one particle of a particle, then you would have shifted your life. And that's what sort of determination means. It's that you can't change everything, but you can change a particle of a particle of a particle and make it better. And yeah.
Anyone else want to come in? I did Namina first because I know she has to leave early, so I wanted to make sure she got that question. So anyone else want to jump in?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
I will say that one of my favorite things about Tarisai's journey in Redemptor, the sequel to Raybearer, is that you see someone who knows who they are already. So that's what Raybearer is about, is her figuring out who she is, or even who she thinks she should be, and who she knows she should be. And in Redemptor, one of the things that made it harder to write for me is that, so Raybearer took me 13 years, and it's a coming of age story. So Redemptor, not only did I have to write it in 9 months, but I had to figure out what to do with a protagonist who's got the identity thing fairly okay. It's just now that she knows what her role is or what it should be, what if she's bad at it? Like this is literally her calling in life. This is absolutely what she's supposed to do. But the decisions she now has to make have these incredible repercussions. And so she's determined to do the right thing, but she keeps I think one of the main conflicts in Redemptor is that it is sometimes easier to be legendary than human. If Raybearer is about deciding to be legendary, to have the courage to change things, Redemptor is about how to be a legend while realizing the limits of your humanity, and also seeing the beauty in still being human. Because, if you're complete legend, then, you might do great things, but because you're still human, there's always going to be a part of you that almost develops this self-loathing for your own weakness and your limitations. Like, even if the whole world is praising you because you've done heroic things, how much more there is to do and how much you haven't done. And there's a foil in Redemptor. It's funny, I get nervous every time people talk about how much they love that there isn't a love triangle in Raybearer, because in Redemptor, I do introduce a second love interest, but I promise it's not tropey. I promise. But he's kind of a foil. This person is, he's a good person. He's a revolutionary, but he represents what happens when you use determination to change the world as a way to avoid dealing with your own weaknesses and your own humanity and your own mortality. He's this amazing hero, but he saw his whole family kind of just systematically poisoned and wiped out. And he's basically a, 19-year-old boy who hasn't ever dealt with his own trauma and is just kind of, and so whenever Tarisai is like, oh, I'm so exhausted, I need a rest, he's like, no, you don't. There are still people suffering out there. What's wrong with you? There are people suffering. We have so much more privilege than them, and we need to keep working. We need to keep working. We need to keep working. What's wrong with you? Just like, and he's a good person. He's not a villain, but it's just this idea of how determination, you have to like how that's only one journey is like learning to be determined to do something, but you still have to handle all of the repercussions of determination itself and what it does to you and how to live in that tension. So yeah, that was kind of a rambly answer, but I'm trying not to give away spoilers.
Namina, thank you so much. It is an honor and absolute privilege to meet you. I am so excited that you were able to stop by. Good luck with the new panel. The Gilded Ones, I finished it last night.
Yay!
So good.
Bye, everyone.
I can't wait to read it. I'm so excited. So nice to meet you, Namina. Good luck with everything else you're doing today.
Thank you.
By the way, I'm so sorry. I think I quoted the wrong person earlier, and I'm sorry about that. I'm kind of a space cadet. Anyway, anyway, never mind. Also, I keep my light keeps falling down, so I'm sorry. I've gotten up a couple times to fix it, and I hope that's not going to be like a problem in the editing. Anyway.
I think I'll be okay. And then let's see. Yeah.
So just kind of going off of what Jordan said, I think, man, determination is so much about being willing to make mistakes, like especially with our superhero type characters. So many of our protagonists, there's this expectation that they're infallible, and when they make really bad mistakes, they're bad characters or bad heroes. And I think if you are waiting on perfection, like nothing will get done ever. But also what I was going to say was that like, especially with fantasy, which is where I mostly work, there's this desire to want a magic power that's going to fix things. But the people who have the magic power for the quick fix, whether it's in a fantasy world or in our world, like the people who have money, the people who have time, like who can do the changes, they don't want to, because they're the reason things need fixing. They have the money and the power because things are broken. And so similarly, in a world where the high and mighty have magic, then they're probably not using it to do anything good. And so, I mean, it requires people who are willing to put in the time, usually generations worth of it, against substantial odds, to not just to survive, but to break down whatever systems. It's like a small amount of corrosive acid in like a giant millions of miles thick skyscraper or something. And sometimes that determination, like Jordan said, it goes into like problematic spins instead. Like that determination to survive, like the Gilded Ones quote, to conquer, it sometimes results in creating a different kind of oppression, or like how people survive sometimes means abandoning their original culture, or abandoning the people who they should or could be bringing with them. All sorts of other more nuanced questions. It's just one of my thoughts about determination in our stories.
I would add to that. Add that, look, we all love determination. We love an underdog story. We love to see people overcome. Like, that's exciting, because it helps us feel that we can overcome, hopefully anything in our lives, that we can get past it. But I do think, as Jordan said, there is the dark side of it. And when I think about Ara's determination in the Kingdom of Souls trilogy, I think about a person who is literally willing to trade off years of her life to get what she wants. And maybe the things that she wants are valid, they're honorable, they're good, but the fact that she has to do that and is willing to do that, it's a big decision. And a little bit of what I was playing on with that ideal was this ideal of a strong Black woman, and this ideal that Black women are supposed to hold the weight of the world on their shoulders and endure and suffer, with the expectation that we will just pick ourselves up and do it over and over and over again until there's nothing left. And that is something that she is kind of going through in this story. And she's got to come to some realization that that's not the way to go. But you see kind of the progression of the series, where she's doing these things and she's making these mistakes and she's kind of doing the best she can. So you can have these great intentions, right? We're doing this thing with great intentions and good reasons, but in the end, what are the consequences? And what we have to face, what that determination is going to cause, and what are we going to be able to live with those repercussions, either to herself personally or to the people that are around her and the world that's around her. And I think that's sometimes something that I felt like I was missing in some of the fantasy stories that I've read in the past when I was very young, is what we need to see the consequences. This isn't a perfect world. And we want to see kind of the whole side of it. And we talk about the villain, is a hero of his own story, but the hero also does villainous things to be able to make what they want happen. And I think that part has to be shown. And that's something that I wanted to show in Aura's kind of determination to get what she wants in the story.
There's a moment about halfway through Victories Greater Than Death, where Tina, the main character, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but it's not a huge spoiler. She is in a situation where in order to save herself and her friends, she has to kill people for the first time. And she, because of some stuff that's happened to her, she's a really good fighter, but she's never actually had to take a life before. And there's no choice in this situation. She has to kill these people in order to save her friends and herself. And, she's just, because she has this idea in her head of like, this is the hero I'm going to be, she is just like, oh, it was no big deal, it was super easy. And like, then, everybody's like, are you sure you're okay? And she's like, oh yeah, I'm fine. That was, I just did what had to be done. And then later it just hits her what she did. And the fact that she took, 3 lives. And these are people who had like dreams and ideas of their own, and they had lives, and they had a future that they don't have anymore. And, this light that was turned out. And she just completely breaks down. And that was a scene that wasn't in my outline originally. It was just a thing that kind of came out as I was writing. And I was like, yeah, she should feel this. This should be a big deal. And it really changed how I wrote the rest of the book after that, because I'm like, you know what? I feel like we do have a lot of heroic stories where killing is just like, oh, that's not a big deal. Oh yeah, we killed a ton of people. It's not whatever. It's fine. They're just stormtroopers. They're just like, bad guys or whatever. And it should always be a big deal, I think. And, especially the past year has really taught me that like human life is really valuable. Like we've all lost people in the last year. So I really wanted to think about those kinds of costs of heroism and like, the things that everybody's been talking about before me about like your humanity and like what it costs you to just keep fighting. And that's the kind of dark side, the underside of determination. And I also think that like knowing that the odds are really against you and fighting anyway is really awesome. And I wanted to showcase that as well.
I'd love to jump in. One of the things I thought about when I was writing Muse is what it looks like when you have been under somebody's thumb for so long that you don't even know what fight looks like, much less are able to locate it within yourself. And then also the ways in which sometimes after we've been in that kind of oppressive or abusive situation, that we can run out and find a replica of that situation. So to further put off like making decisions for yourself or such self-actualization, because you just aren't ready yet. And so, the main character in Muse is putting herself really in positions where she's kind of absolving herself of any responsibility for what happens to her for, the first part of the book. And it's interesting to think about the word determination, I think, because, it also means like, what's going to happen to you has been predetermined, it has been determined that you are going to do this. And really, the thing that was most interesting to me when I was writing Muse was writing a girl who has been so beaten down that she has forgotten how to want. And then to see what happens when she can see a path forward for herself. Because at the end of Muse, and I don't think that this is a spoiler, she really is in a position to become the same kind of petty tyrant that the people around her have been. And I think that it's really interesting to see what happens when, we're given power for the first time over ourselves or over other people, and the importance of you know, making empathetic, conscientious decisions, even when, you know, you've seen very little empathy in your own life.
Fantastic. I think we are about to wrap up. I want to thank all of our panelists for being so absolutely fabulous, so absolutely amazing, and just sharing your books and the joy that you have with this world. I am incredibly grateful that you were all able to be here.